Thank you very much for listening to this Catalogue Week presentation about some of our work cataloguing through a brand new series of military service personnel records. These series are W0420, W0421 and W0427, and they form part of a much larger accession of service personnel records from the Ministry of Defence, which the National Archives will receive and catalogue over several years. I've been working on this project as part of my role in TNA's Cataloguing, Taxonomy and Data team. Although all three of the series we've catalogued contain records of those who served in the army as other ranks during the Second World War, they do represent a diversity of experience. W0420 concerns the records of those who served in the corps of the Royal Electrical and Mechanical Engineers, and includes more than 56,000 files. W0421 pertains to the records of those who served in selected smaller corps and includes almost 100,000 files. In contrast, W0427 is smaller, comprising 471 service personnel files of the women who served as nurses and in other ranks in Eastern Africa during the war. Together, these series comprise more than 150,000 records in total. I'd like to explain some of the work behind preparing, cataloguing and releasing them to the public via our online catalogue Discovery. Unlike some of the cataloguing work that takes place at TNA, these series are not part of a catalogue enhancement project. Instead, they were brand new accessions, and we needed to start from scratch when it came to preparing and releasing the catalogue descriptions. We received the physical files from MOD in big tranches, known as collations. For W0420 and W0421, alongside the physical records, MOD also provided us with a basic skeleton of information about the contents of each of the files. This included, for example, the name of the serviceman, their service number, and date of birth. This data was certainly a useful starting point for cataloguing the records, but we did have to be careful about how we approached it. We didn't have ready-made catalogue descriptions, but rather functional databases that MOD had used to manage the records during their working life. We knew that the information provided would have to undergo a considerable transformation in order for it to be useful to us as catalogue descriptions. When it came to W0427, we didn't have any metadata at all, just the physical files that MOD had sent to us. For this series, colleagues from Collections Expertise and Engagement indexed the files themselves, extracting key information to build an understanding of the history and experiences communicated by the series. They then passed this data on to us to catalogue and release to the public. One area where the data provided by MOD was particularly useful was in helping us to decide what information we ought to include in the catalogue descriptions. We knew that we needed the descriptions to be useful to readers who were searching for individual service people and as consistent as possible. In other words, all of our descriptions had to be compliant with the standards framework surrounding TNA's work. However, at the same time, we had to be realistic about the resources we had available for such a large-scale project. Of great importance, our descriptions also had to be ethically and legally sound. We needed to make sure that we were showing the respect required to each record subject, particularly as many of the files include considerable personal or confidential information. Taking all of this into account, we settled on catalogue descriptions showing initials, surnames, service numbers, and dates of birth where this information was available. There would also be some caveats to protect personal information. Specifically, this meant that for individuals born less than 100 years ago, and therefore considered likely to still be alive, we would redact the descriptions to show just the initials, surname, and the year of birth. It also meant that as a blanket rule, we decided to close all files for public consultation until 115 years had passed since the year of birth of the record subject. This was in order to protect the personal information included in some of these files. From this foundation, we were able to make a start on transforming the data into catalogue descriptions. The first step was to decide whether or not we felt the records included in each collation transferred to us by MOD were cohesive enough to form a series in their own right. To make this decision, we worked closely with military records experts in our Collections Expertise and Engagement Department. These colleagues also undertook research into the content and history of each of the collations, building up the information which we later used as the series-level description made available on Discovery. This description provides readers with information about the type of files included within a series, their context, history, and any related records also held by TNA. It was at this point that the files went from being contained in 3 collations organised by MOD into the form in which they will be preserved and made accessible by TNA as 3 series, W0420, W0421 and W0427. Once we had assigned the records into series and had a good understanding of their context, we were able to start creating catalogue descriptions for each file. The first stage was to take intellectual control of the data we had from MOD. Colleagues in our IT services department delivered this data to our team in spreadsheets extending to tens of thousands of rows. We then assigned TNA references to each file, allowing each file to become a piece. A piece is a valid unit of description which we could upload to Discovery, thus embedding each file in TNA's catalogue and elucidating its context, as well as providing a deliverable unit for readers to request in the reading rooms. The next stage was to make sure that the data we had was accurate and consistent. Although the bulk of the data from MOD was reasonably high quality and could be adapted to our needs, we did find several areas that needed to be amended. These instances ranged from examples of clear typos, such as having an open square bracket featuring in place of a P in a surname, to dates of birth that were clearly erroneous, such as dates of birth recorded to suggest that someone who was born in 1820 could have served in the Second World War. Against this, we also had completely absent rows of data, where MOD had not captured any information about particular files. In some cases, we were able to amend the data from common sense, identifying and rectifying clear typos as we came across them, for example. However, in other cases, we needed to check the documents themselves to record information that was missing. Because of the sheer scale of these series, even a small percentage of inaccuracies translated into a considerable number of records to inspect, and we found that this was an area that became particularly time-consuming for our team. To date, we have checked a rather staggering 1,656 files in the repositories at Kew to collect, amend and clarify data that was either absent or was suspect enough to raise considerable doubt about its validity and accuracy. We updated the data in Excel spreadsheets and recorded each case of an inaccuracy or inadequacy and the resolution that we found. Each of the 3 series presented slightly different data quality challenges. W0421 presented more examples of completely unindexed files, where in comparison, W0420 included more erroneous dates of birth. We became familiar with the demographics of each series as we worked through them, and developed a good sense of what inaccuracies we particularly needed to look out for in each of the series. For W0427, indexing the material ourselves at Kew was a big undertaking, but also gave us complete confidence over the quality of the cataloguing data. Every stage of preparing and cataloguing this data has required close attention to detail and a sound understanding of archival practice as we forge a new process for dealing with these extensive record sets. At each stage, we recognise that we have a responsibility to the public and the record subject to employ a consistent and fair approach to cataloguing every file. In all of our work, we have to maintain a quality standard while also making the files available to the public in a timely manner. As we catalogued W0420, W0421 and W0427, we became aware that we needed some additional resources in order to achieve the quality standards we required. We were successful in recruiting a new cataloguing officer, James, who is a qualified archivist and has been able to share responsibility for data quality management, checking documents, amending faulty data, and preparing catalogue descriptions. The work was not over once we were happy with the quality of the descriptive information we had. We then had to transfer the data from our spreadsheets into the catalogue. This first involved importing an XML skeleton into the editorial element of our cataloguing system, which created the space for us to load the full descriptions. Once this stage was complete, we encoded the descriptions we had written into the XML language our systems recognise, meaning that the descriptive information for each file would appear in the right format on discovery. We relied on Excel functions to encode the data, and as such, we were then able to load them into the cataloguing system thanks to the earlier skeleton import. Once the data was in the editorial part of our catalogue, we could perform a final check. This final check allowed us to identify and amend any previously missed inaccuracies in the data. As such, it forms an important part of our data quality management process. Finally, we were able to release the descriptions on discovery for the public to browse and to order to the reading rooms. It felt particularly momentous when we released the first descriptions, which were W0420 files. But this was certainly not the end of our work. With each series catalogued, we've learned important lessons about this data and its peculiarities, and we've used this experience to improve and streamline our workflows. As a consequence of our work, we now have 3 fully catalogued series of Second World War service personnel files available for the public on discovery. We've also built up a considerable body of knowledge around cataloguing such large collections. Between them, the series that we have worked with provide a fascinating insight into military, social and family history, and they represent a range of experiences, including of women's services overseas. Crucially, we now also have a process in place and the resources necessary to allow us to catalogue further similar accessions to the same high standards. Work continues alongside our colleagues in MOD to arrange the transfer and cataloguing of further series, and we're very much looking forward to furthering the progress we've already made. For further information about the project, please do see the information in the FAQs and research guide, which are linked here. Thank you very much for listening to this short presentation.